Everyone to our next webinar for World Migratory Bird Day. I'm really excited to have you on again. I appreciate the people that we see coming back time and time again, as well as all of the new, I guess, quote unquote, faces who are joining us this time. Uh, this year, our World Migratory Bird Day is such an amazing program. It is every year, but I want to feature what you see here on your screen is the art for 2026, and it's just incredibly beautiful. I think that the screen really shows very well that it is hand embroidered. So each of these birds was done separately, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is our Environment for the Americas team, and I want to thank everybody on our team who makes this program possible. We work from Canada to Argentina and the Caribbean to bring education to communities, to help them explain migratory birds and what a migratory bird is and how we can better conserve them. But Environment for the Americas is a nonprofit organization. If you're not familiar with us, we're based in Boulder, Colorado, but again, with staff who represent us from Mexico, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and other parts of, and then in Canada, we have partners as well. Our four pillars of our organization are everything that has to do with helping birds, from providing education to early career trainings to our own research projects, and to also education. We work really at the community level. We love working with every level of organization in a community, from the government of that community to the people, from schools to leadership. And that's how we feel we can actually affect bird conservation. You can see here is Miguel, our Latin American coordinator. A lot of our work is with youth, but it's also with adults. So when you think of World Migratory Bird Day, I hope you think of it as a way to work with not only young people and the next generation of conservationists, but also with adults who may not know so much about birds, who may need a little bit of help getting started in bird watching or in bird conservation, as well as making an impact in their communities and leading their families and their communities. And I want to thank our sponsors because our sponsors are the ones who make this possible. So thank you to our Global Flyways partners, to our new sponsor, Birdfeed, which is a great feeder company. I hope you'll look at that. The U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. Our title sponsors for the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Partners in Flight, and Feather Friendly. And then we have friends all over the Americas who help us spread the word, which includes Birds Caribbean, Nature Canada, POW, and Conabio, as well as our partners and program sponsors, including FLAP and the National Audubon Society, Department of War, Vortex Optics, and the Optics for the Tropics. So again, many thanks to our partners and sponsors and contributors who make this possible, as well as to all of you out there who give your time and energy to putting on a World Migratory Bird Day program or activity. And as you know, every year we have a new conservation theme. We address a lot of the important and critical aspects of bird conservation, from habitats to preserving our dark skies, to understanding why birds matter, and to reducing our plastic use. And every year we have a wonderful artist who comes from a different part of the world, and that's true this year as well. We do work globally, so World Migratory Bird Day is not only in the Americas, it's also in the other flyways around the world. And to accomplish that, we work with our partners at the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species, at the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership, and with the African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement. So many thanks to them also for spreading the word and for making this a global effort. And then back to our 2026 World Migratory Bird Day art. And as I mentioned, this art is it's produced by hand every year. It's either painted, we've had metal art, but this year was new. We've never had textile arts. This is Luisa Lacerda from Brazil. And Louisa took up embroidery during COVID, and you can see as a side hobby, it became something really, really incredible for her. And so it's turned into, I think, a very important part of her work now, especially in terms of raising awareness of birds and bird conservation. So we really appreciate her contribution to this effort. And just so you understand how the art was created this year, you see it as one piece, but she actually created each individual species, and then we put those together graphically to create our final poster and the rest of our work. I want to remind you that we have so many opportunities for you to get involved. We try to provide every piece of a World Migratory Bird Day program, activity, or full-blown event, whatever you decide to host. We provide the education materials in print and in download. You can go to our Trello board and you can find these materials to download as well, along with information for your newspapers, to put on your Facebook pages, however you'd like to highlight your event. We also host these webinars, and thank you again for joining us today. We'll be continuing throughout the year, and our next webinar will focus on the waterbird census and doing these surveys and how they're important to bird conservation and how the community can get involved. So it's a very important part of it. These webinars wouldn't be possible without our speakers, and I just want to thank all the prior speakers who have joined us, as well as our new speakers today. They volunteer their time, their expertise, and their energy and passion for birds, and we just really appreciate that. Our first speaker up today is Laura Mingak. She is I hope I said that correctly, I forgot to ask you. She is a PhD candidate at Oregon State University studying human-wildlife coexistence and agricultural systems. She got her master's in science from Virginia Tech, where she also researched human disturbance to migratory shorebirds. And after that, she worked as a wildlife biologist for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, working with subsistence harvesters on bird conservation and management. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Laura. And Laura, again, you can just let me know when you'd like me to change the slides, but we look forward to your talk and to your information about human-wildlife coexistence. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And of course, let me know if you have difficulty hearing me. But we can go ahead and get started with the presentation. I was approached to talk to you all about human disturbance to birds, and particularly as it relates to kind of participating in community science efforts. And so that's what I want to talk to you all a little bit more about today. A lot of the work that I've been in part of on human disturbance to birds has focused specifically on shorebirds, so birds that we find in coastal environments, but a lot of this research is also applicable to birds in other environments as well. So yeah, let's dive into the next slide. So I want us all to imagine for a second that you've recently gotten into birding, and maybe you've joined a fun group like this one. And this seems probably familiar to a lot of folks. There's a group of people here, they're got their binoculars up, they're looking around for a cool bird. And there's something really wonderful about this. There's this kind of shared moment of curiosity and wonder. And what I really want us to think about in this presentation is not just how we experience birds and birding, but also how birds experience us. So for the next slide, this is a different example. I think this is pretty obvious when I say disturbance. It's pretty easy to say, like, this is a problem. This dog seems to be causing a disturbance, and let's not be this dog. But disturbance doesn't always look like this. Sometimes it can be a lot more subtle. So we'll move on to the next one. This is a definition of disturbance. It's quite long, but we'll go through it together. And this comes from a group of expert scientists and managers that worked together to co-develop this definition based on their own expertise. So human disturbance, we can think of it as a human activity that causes an individual or a group of birds to alter their normal behavior. And it can prevent birds from using important habitats and basically from conducting their normal activities. And this definition really has two parts. The first being that human activity might cause a bird to change what it's doing. And that second part there, that is that disturbance might not just affect a single bird on a single day, but that it might render a space or a habitat unavailable for birds at a particularly critical time. So to move on, what counts as disturbance? Now, disturbance can exist on a spectrum. Some disturbances might be pretty trivial and some might be pretty consequential. And responses to disturbances can be varied. And here are just some examples. So we can think about disturbance in a behavioral context. This is probably the most obvious. So birds might flush or they might alarm call. We can think of it as disruptions to a bird's foraging or roosting behavior. Again, they're changing their behavior in response to something that they find threatening. Another type of disturbance could be disturbances to their reproductive cycles. So disturbances might cause birds to abandon nests or lead to mortality in their young. It can also lead to things like reduced fledging rates, and cause reproductive declines if disturbance is severe enough. And finally, we can think about these things in isolation as a single disturbance event, or we can think about them as a cumulative series of events, so that each small disturbance, each time a bird flies or alarm calls, it might not be that serious, but if that bird is then eating less or resting less because it's having to make those other actions, it's having to fly away, that could end up reducing its fitness and therefore having a more cumulative, a long-term effect on that bird or a bird population. So to then the next slide for some examples. And these are just a couple of examples here. There can be many other things, but the impacts of a particular activity can depend on a lot of different factors. And again, the presence of humans or presence of human activity doesn't necessarily mean that birds are being disturbed. So some of the examples that I chose here are things like motorized recreation, so things like cars or ATVs, motorboats, particularly in areas that might be sensitive. So in nesting areas or in roosting areas, places where birds might be resting. As we saw from one of the early slides, dogs, particularly unleashed dogs, might be pretty disturbing. Dogs, in a lot of cases, can be perceived as predators by birds. They don't know that your dog is friendly and sweet, and they might think, hey, that's a fox, and it's going to come after me and my babies. And so birds oftentimes see dogs as a threat. And one of the ones we'll talk about a lot in this is kind of general human presence. And this can be a lot subtler. And there are a lot of instances in which birds habituate or get used to people. But birds, again, can be particularly sensitive at certain periods. So things like nesting might be particularly sensitive times when birds might be a little bit less likely to habituate to human presence. And other things might contribute to this, like the size of a group. As group sizes increase in certain areas, those tend to be more disturbing to birds. So I do want to point out, again, that I don't think any of these activities are done with any type of ill intent, right? These are people and their pets just out having fun, doing what they enjoy. But hopefully in the future, we can start to think a little bit more about how those activities might impact birds and how we can do our part to reduce those disturbances. So we'll dive in next to some of the research, and I'm just going to point out a little bit or just a few examples from the research. There's a ton out there. I really encourage people to find particular research that they're interested in, and each of my slides will have one or two example citations on them. This doesn't cover everything. It's just if you'd like to learn more and feel like reading academic papers, you're welcome to dive into those. But so as I'm sure we've touched on a little bit, recreation can have impacts on birds. So things like heavily used trails. Again, we talked about group sizes, and there's different types of ways that recreation can be impactful on birds. Again, birds can habituate to certain types of chronic disturbance, but if that disturbance is sort of out of the ordinary or it's happening at a sensitive time, it can be a little bit more disturbing. Oops, sorry. We can go to the next slide too. There we go. So one of the more practical metrics for people in the field as you're birding yourself could be this concept of flight initiation distance. And so this is basically the distance at which a bird exposed to a human activity begins to initiate some type of escape behavior. So flying away. We could also think of it as walking away, basically changing its behavior, trying to get away from whatever it thinks is disturbing. So for example, on the slide here, various research has shown that willets will flush when people are about 20 to 30 meters away from them. And these distances can vary based on the time of year, the amount of cover that's present at a site, and the speed or direction that a disturbance is happening to them. So if you're walking directly at a bird, it can be more disturbing than if you walk sort of horizontally or diagonally at a bird. And what's important to remember is that these avoidance behaviors, this flushing behavior, flying away, can cause that additional energy expenditure that was in the definition we brought up earlier. And those types of behaviors can have negative consequences. Again, this bird is doing something different from what it wanted to do, from what it, needs to do. Perhaps it's spending energy flying away and not spending its energy eating or resting, or potentially looking for mates, something like that. So the next slide. So this is just an example, and we don't have to look through every single row on this table, but I just want to show that there are a lot of different distances for different species. And FID, that column again, means flight initiation distance. So again, the distance at which a person or a disturbance is from a bird when it flies away. So memorizing or knowing these exact distances isn't important, but remembering that if a bird is changing its behavior, then it probably means you're too close. So the next slide. I'm only going to spend a second on this slide as some other presenters are going to talk about it. But again, they'll bring up playback and what we call audio luring. So trying to bring a bird in by playing a call. And this playback or audio luring might trigger certain behaviors in birds like territorial defenses or flushing behaviors. And again, if it's changing its normal behavior, you're probably disturbing it in some way. So again, I'll only talk about this one for a second. We can move on to the next slide as I don't want to step on other people's toes. So here's a tension that I want to name directly because I think it's one of the more interesting and potentially one of the more uncomfortable parts of this conversation is that community science, so participating in things like eBird or iNaturalist, NestWatch, many other programs, has been generally transformative for our understanding of bird populations, their migrations, their distributions across the world. And this data that birders generate collectively is irreplaceable. And we need more of this data, not less. But we also have to consider that the act of collecting this data can be a source of disturbance that we've just spent the last few minutes describing. So the next slide. And I don't want people to be paralyzed by fear that they might be doing something wrong or that they might be disturbing birds. And there are plenty of resources available on how to bird responsibly. And the other presenters are going to touch on that as well. So for example, this image here from the Audubon Society is showing that if you're birding on a beach, you can follow this guidance to walk around birds on the wet sand, avoiding the dry sand where they might be nesting or roosting. Some other guidelines are to consider are things like maintaining your distance. Again, we talked about that flight initiation distance. And so letting the bird's behavior really be your guide. You can also think about limiting time at sensitive areas, especially during nesting season, and modeling good behavior for others in the field, and potentially talking to your friends or other birders you see out in the field about being responsible. So finally, I just want to revisit this first slide that I had. We can see that our birder on this slide is at a good distance. These little piping plovers in the corner are just resting, they're relaxing. And I want people to think about cultivating a habit of asking, is my presence right now helping or is it harming this bird? And again, community scientists are in a really powerful position. They're uniquely positioned to be both data collectors and stewards of the environment. And these two roles can reinforce each other when done thoughtfully. And so I know that you guys are already out there paying attention, generating data. And the ask again isn't to do less, but it's to bring the same quality of attention that you bring to when you're birding to your own presence in the habitat and to help others think about how to do the same to reduce your disturbances. So I think I went slightly over time. I apologize, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's all right. That was excellent, Laura. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take a moment because a lot of people have been coming into the room to remind you that there is translation, English to Spanish, Spanish to English. Our next presentation will also be in English. You can go to the globe at the bottom of your screen or to the More button to find that tab. And Miguel, maybe you'd like to give that in Spanish.
Sí, muchas gracias a todos los que están acá.
Yes, thank you everyone. To all Spanish speakers, we're going to continue in English. So if you want to listen to the translation in Spanish, you can find the globe in the lower part of your screen, and there you can select the Spanish channel. If you cannot see the globe icon, then click on the three dots where you can see more, and there you will be able to find it. So we hope that you keep enjoying the
Excellent. Thank you so much.
presentations.
And I'm so excited to introduce to you Melissa Groo, our next speaker. Melissa is a Sony Artisan of Imagery, a fellow with the International League of Conservation Photographers, an advisor to the Audubon Society on photography content and ethics, and an assignment photographer for Audubon and Smithsonian magazines covering wildlife conservation stories. She also helped to create the Audubon Guide to Ethical Bird Photography and Videography. So I think that the coming slides will also be a feast for your eyes. And thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be a part of this initiative. And thank you everybody for attending. And Laura, that was absolutely fascinating. And I think it dovetails so well with my work. And I'd love to talk to you at another time. But I think also my presentation goes very well after yours because I talk about shorebirds. Let's go to the first slide. I'm calling this Good Photos, Happy Birds because I really believe those things are related. I really believe that if we adopt more sort of thoughtful, ethical field practices, we're going to get better pictures. To me, that's like the big secret. Like if you can have empathy and think about and read the behavior of the animal, of the bird, and adjust your own behavior accordingly and make them as comfortable as possible, they're going to stick around longer. And you're going to have a much better opportunity to get them capturing, to actually capture natural behavior, to get them behaving naturally. And that's really when you get the gold. So I'm going to talk about shorebirds. Ethics in photography is a huge thing, and I've devoted a lot of my career to it. It's a subject that fascinates me greatly, and I think a lot of it comes out of empathy, really feeling empathy for your subject and realizing that, you know, to us, these are just about photos, but to a wild animal, every single moment is about survival. And so it's really good for us to keep that in mind. Let's start with the first slide after this. And I'm sure many of you know that the figures are pretty staggering about how many people are engaged in bird watching now. And I think that just exploded with COVID and has just continued to just go up and up. And really it's about a third of the population that in some way or another is interested in birds, whether they're feeding them in their backyard or they're making trips or they're just walking around on a Saturday morning to see who's returned in the spring. And so that's really exciting. What we have to remember too, though, is that that's a lot more pressure on the remaining birds. As the next slide shows, we have lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And those are, that's a lot of birds that we no longer have. Populations have really dropped, and actually about 67% of all bird species are in decline. And so I feel like it's more incumbent on us than ever to really be incredibly thoughtful because every individual bird matters. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to talk about shorebirds. They're a particular love for me, but it's also kind of the season when we wildlife photographers start thinking about photographing shorebirds. Piping plovers are coming back right now, and lots of other shorebirds. And, you know, if you look at these numbers, they're pretty grim for shorebirds. Their numbers have really dropped precipitously. They and grassland birds and aerial insectivores are really the fastest dropping populations. And so it's absolutely crucial that we're in the field, that we really behave very consciously and thoughtfully and make decisions that place the welfare of the bird first. Next slide. So I'm going to go over just a few tips and possible approaches when I'm in the field, that I adopt when I'm in the field, stuff that I've learned over time because I'm crazy about photographing shorebirds, especially piping plovers. And I think, as I said, when we sort of integrate compassion and conservation principles into our approach in the field as photographers, and really put the welfare of the subject first, that's really going to put us ahead of the game. And there was a thought that I didn't finish about the numbers of people in birding. A lot of the people who are into birding, of course, want to get photos now. And digital photography has advanced so much and made incredible pictures possible to all of us. And so a big percentage of those people who are out birding have camera in hand. So that's why I feel like ethics in bird photography more and more needs to be discussed as we sort of have these declining number of birds and this, greatly increasing number of photographers out there. Now we can go anywhere in the world, right? We can go to the furthest corners. We can find a guide to take us to our bird. We've got thermal imaging and drones and instant messaging, and it's sort of like the best time in history to be a wildlife photographer and sort of the worst time in history to be a bird. Let's go to the next slide. So first of all, when you're out there, you're at the beach, you got shorebirds, you want to really try to get low as soon as you can. Every bird, every wild animal really sees us first and foremost as a predator. And so with that in mind, you want to be less intimidating and lower your profile. You want to keep that distance like Laura talked about. And you want to move very slowly and really don't directly approach. Never really directly approach. Try to not even look them in the eye. Just pretend you're going about your business doing something else, and you could kind of zigzag or approach at an angle. You can move closer and then sit and watch the bird and wait for them to go back to what they were doing, foraging at the tide perhaps, or resting. And then once they're calm, then you can advance a little bit more. But, try to avoid talking, stay as still as you can when you're still. All these things really make a big difference in how the bird responds to you and perceives you. Next slide. So this is my favorite position at the beach. I am typically lying flat on my belly, and I have my long lens. That's a 600 millimeter. I have my long lens on something that's called a skimmer pod, although there are different names for these and they're made by different companies, but this one's made by Naturescapes, and I think you can buy it at B&H. Let's go to the next slide for a better view of what that skimmer pod looks like. It's essentially like a frying pan there, and I've got I can't remember what brand, a ball head there. You could put a gimbal head on there. And it's just such a wonderful device because it does allow you to be very low, and you can just kind of scoot it in front of you on the sand. And I've gotten a lot of use out of that. And I just put it on a clip and I just have it hang off my belt when I'm hiking. Next slide. And the great thing about being at the level of the bird is it really brings you into their world. And I think it also sort of gives them the dignity and the nobility that I think they have. And they really kind of shine more that way. And it throws the background more out of focus. That's a really important aesthetic reason to do it. So I always love to be at the level of the bird. That's I think super important for the most engaging photos. And of course I was helped by a beautiful light here. This is a dowitcher, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it's long-billed or short-billed. Next slide, please. And this is what's often compared to a cotton ball on toothpicks. This is a piping plover chick, and I'm just obsessed with these birds. I just think they're utterly so special. And I photographed them quite a bit in Long Island and New Jersey. And so again, you see how being low allows you to really enter the world of that bird, and you're less threatening. It's throwing that background out of focus, so it's a great way to go. And I know it's hard for some of us to get all the way down, but now we have these articulating screens that we can flip up, so we could be sitting and looking at that screen, or even just shooting from a sitting position is better than standing. Next slide, please. So a great strategy, I'm sure many of you know this, but you want to watch the birds from a distance, and it's always great, no matter what you're doing, to gather baseline behavior, right? Because you want to know if your presence is affecting them before you're really sort of in their sphere of comfort. And so if you stand back and you sort of watch what they're doing anyway, and then you see how that behavior changes as you approach, that can be really instructive for how you can modify your behavior. But this is a great photo strategy in terms of how you position yourself to photograph, especially sandpipers or sanderlings that are moving along the waves and feeding along the water there. So you find out what direction they're going, watch them for a moment, and then you scurry ahead of them, keeping your distance from them, but you get ahead of them quite a bit, and then you get perfectly positioned how you want to be, as low as you can be, and then you just wait for them, and you will be amazed how they will just sort of see you as another person kind of lying on the beach and not see you as a threat, and they'll just come right to you and move past you. Next slide. And so, for example, we're all used to seeing sites like this of sanderlings moving along the water there and foraging as they go, and that's the perfect situation to kind of make a wide berth around them and go quite a ways ahead of them. And next image, please. So this shows me, actually this is in Texas, the Gulf Coast, and those are avocets, and I was waiting for them to do just that. And they did eventually walk by me. Next slide. And so here's a typical image that you could get from that, prone position and being at the level of the bird and just being patient and waiting for them to comfortably approach you. Next slide. So, nesting season is critically important for birds. This is how we're going to get the next generation of birds, right? Nesting and chick season is the time when we must exercise sort of the utmost care to not interfere with this critical life process. And so I'm always extremely careful around any nesting situation. I photographed these American avocets, which might be my favorite shorebird, in Montana a few years ago, and I was at quite a distance with a long lens, 600 millimeter, and a 2x teleconverter, and this was a salt flat on the edge of a lake, and they were building their nest, and it was really very beautiful. Next slide. And it's super important for us to respect the closed off, the roped off areas that are often set aside, especially along the Atlantic coast, where certain species like piping plovers, American oystercatchers, least terns, in many places they are threatened or outright endangered. And so as photographers, we need to be just super conscientious about that. And even if no one's around, don't scooch closer. Respect that roped off boundary, because there's a lot of thought behind it. And we don't want to do anything to frighten the parents off of their eggs or their chicks. And so I'm always kind of near the edge outside of the rope and low with as much lens as I have available, teleconverters, etc. Next image, please. And so through using that technique, I've been able to get some really nice shots of, as in this case, the least tern, which is endangered in New Jersey, and their chicks. And I'm able to not drive them off of their nests, off of their chicks or eggs. And that's really crucially important. Next slide. And here's a family of piping plovers, a parent, bringing them under, perhaps has uttered a call to have them go under her or him. And as I look back at this, I wonder, was it my presence? Did my presence make this parent nervous, such that they wanted to be sheltering the chicks? But again, I worked at very long distances. Next slide. So, as I said, careful not to scare a chick's parent away or keep it from returning by being too close, because it's unbelievable. There are predators at the beach, gulls and crows, that are watching for just that moment that a parent leaves an egg or a little chick, and will fly in and snatch it away. I'm serious, like within a minute or two, this absolutely happens. And so when we get too close to a parent and chick and the parent takes off as we approach, that's not a good sign. Of course, they're often going away because they need to go get fish or what have you to feed their young, but just carefully watch it. Is it going out to ocean to fish? And are there predators around? Do you need to back up? These are really critical things to be thinking about and aware of. It's like you've got to be kind of looking at the whole story that's happening around you and not just be so focused on getting that lone chick that is so vulnerable, because a lot of shorebirds can't fly for the first month of their life. So they are just completely without defense. There's no place to hide. Next slide, please. So, you just look at this like tiny piping plover chick, and it's just very, very vulnerable to any predators that might be around. Next slide, please. And here's a crow. I don't want to cast aspersions on this individual. This was from some different photo session. He wasn't looking at that piping plover chick. But, crows are very intelligent, and they know when they can get a quick meal, and who can blame them. Next slide. And something that I became aware of in my journey through photography is that piping plover chicks and chicks of other species, I'm sure, need to go down from their roped off areas down to the waterline or near the waterline to feed at the rack, which is also known as beach rack or the rack line. Next slide, please. So, okay, this is an older, this is not a chick, this maybe might be an adolescent. And this is getting some sort of worm from a wet area near the water. But if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what I was just referring to. This is a chick running down to the rack line. And one of my favorite photos of a piping plover chick just shows off those teeny little stick legs. Next slide, please. So the rack line, we know what that looks like. Some people like to, at posh beach clubs, rake this away, thereby depriving the birds of really essential food possibilities. But what the rack line is an accumulation of organic debris that's been thrown up there by high tide or high winds. And it's a really important place for birds to get nutrients. So, I really thought about it in my position. I always wanted to make sure, as time went on and I learned about this, that I wasn't blocking their passageway. I wasn't positioned right between the nest behind the ropes and the water. I didn't want them to feel intimidated by my presence. So I made sure to position myself such that they had that full access. Next slide. And here you can find one getting some sort of, I can't tell if that's a little creature that it's grabbing there, but that's a piping plover chick as well. Next slide. And of course, as always, with any wild animal, you want to watch for signs of alarm, because that's going to be your sign. Of course, if the alarm is targeted to you, that's your sign that you either need to really back away or even leave. Next slide. So you won't find killdeer at the beach, of course. They are a shorebird, but they're often quite far from water. can even be found on roofs and in driveways and gravel roads. You know, they pick kind of what seems to us like the most unlikely places. But they, of course, have this quite well-known distraction display that they do. Sometimes they're at the nest when they do it, and sometimes they do it at a distance. But it is intended to sort of mislead you or lead you away from their treasure, their nest, their eggs, their chicks. So when you see that behavior, leave the area. And if you feel like the nest needs protecting, you could always, stake it off somehow or put sticks around. It's something that I've done in the past to warn other people that there's a nest there. Next slide. This was an American avocet. I was driving along a lonely country road in Montana and North Dakota, and this American avocet was very, I mean, he must have had a lot of hormones going. He was very upset with me that I was driving down the road, and he came and stood in front of my car. He or she, and was displaying just strenuously. And as excited I was that there might be a nest there, I thought to myself, I'm not going to go look for that nest. You know, this bird is so vigorously defending its nesting area. Why would I want to introduce additional stress? And also, I'm not going to get any good photos when I've got a stressed subject like that. So these are all things to look for, but we kind of have to know what we're looking for, right? And there's so much good information online. If we go to the next slide, knowing your subject is essential for being a good photographer and an ethical photographer, and those things go together. Next slide. And the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, wonderful institution that I live near, has a great free reference guide online where you can look up some basic information and learn about, what's the habitat you want to try to find that bird in, and what does it eat, and all kinds of good information that's going to serve you really well and help you be able to anticipate behaviors and be ready with your camera settings. And so that's really wonderful. Next slide. And if you really want to take a deep dive, you could subscribe to the Birds of the World like I do, which is really sort of the be-all and end-all resource, just doing a deep dive into each species, and everything is curated beautifully and contributed to by top scientists on different species. And you can really drill down and find out like just minuscule details about just the natural history of a particular species. Next slide. So yes, Susan referred to the fact that I created this. I did so along with Ken Kaufman. Some of you will know his guides, and he's a great writer. And so we came up with some just basic, it's not rules, it's just more sort of what are ethical field practices that we can follow when we're in the field that really places the welfare of the bird paramount. And a lot of these practices now underlie the guidelines for the photo contest and sort of a lot of other policies across the organization. I'm really proud of Audubon for being such a leader in talking about ethics in bird photography and videography. And we have a lot of articles on the site. There's a whole ethics in photography section with different articles that I suggest people check that out. It's a great resource. And next slide. And then I just did, if you guys want more information, I just did a long podcast for B&H, the Superstore in New York City. They've got a great photography podcast, and I really go into a lot of different topics having to do with ethics, including call playback, which I really try to discourage for photography's sake, but that's a whole another topic. So you could check that podcast out, and then I think there's one more slide. So I just want to reiterate something that's good for us all to keep in mind, me included. Just remember, to us, this is simply about photos, but to a wild bird, every single moment is about survival. Thanks, everybody. I went way over time. I'm so sorry. Holy smokes.
I will. There are such good topics. It's hard not to. And thank you so much, Melissa. And I hope everyone enjoyed those beautiful photos. I know I'd love to just have all of them on my walls. So thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so
We
much. Thanks,
appreciate it.
everybody. Yep.
And at this time, we're going to be switching to a presenter who'll be speaking in Spanish. So I want to introduce Ana Amable. And if someone can highlight her, please. For those of you who need translation to English, please look for the translation button at the bottom. And I want to thank Claudia Rangel, our translator, for being with us today. And she's often with us. So thank you so much to her for doing these translations. It's really important to us. Our next speaker is amazing. She's the director and founder of Peru Women Birders, a civil society that through which she promotes bird watching and women's leadership across 13 regions of Peru. She has a master's degree in ecology and environmental management and a bachelor's degree in ecotourism. I love what she says about herself as a birder and a photographer as well. And this is an amazing photo of her. Is that she says that she is a minimalist by choice and a naturalist by vocation. She works to maintain consistency between what she teaches and what she practices, championing a respectful and mindful relationship with biodiversity. So I want to thank Anna for being here today, and we look forward to what you have to share about working with your groups in the field and being ethical birders. Thank you so much, Anna.
Muchas gracias por la presentación.
Thank you so much for the intro.
Un comentario antes de que Ana inicie.
Just one
Para
comment
los
before Ana begins.
escuchantes en español,
For those that are
estaba
listening in
en el
Spanish,
canal de
you
para
were
escuchar
in
a
the
Ana
Spanish
en
channel
español en el idioma
before.
original, por favor, puede
To
cambiar
listen to
a
Anna
audio
in Spanish, you can switch back to original audio because Anna is going to speak in Spanish. So you will be able to listen to Anna in Spanish. Go to original audio. Thank you, Anna.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone.
Muchas gracias. Estoy muy agradecida por la invitación.
I am very thankful for this invitation.
Bueno,
And
este día voy a hablarles un poco
today
sobre
I'm going
los guidelines
to
de ética en la
talk
observación de aves.
about
Sin
the
embargo,
ethic
estos
guidelines
conceptos
in
algunos
birdwatching.
de las prácticas
However,
se pueden
these
tranquilamente
practices,
cualquier
these good
actividad a
practices
un animal
and
o al aire libre.
guidelines can be applied to any type of wildlife observation.
A la pregunta, ¿por qué un código de ética
And
para la
why
observación
do
de
we need
aves?
a code of
Primero, porque
ethics
hay
for
un
birdwatching?
aumento
Well, first, because there
considerable
is
del especializado
an
ahora
important increase in
recientemente ha
specialized
crecido mucho
tourism,
eso,
especially, for
y
example,
así
in
sea por
Peru, that
una
is growing a
actividad de
lot.
ocio de calidad,
It is
especialmente porque la
also
observación de aves
a quality hobby because
incrementa
birdwatching
es
is increasing.
es un buen indicador para la salud mental de las personas.
Because it's a good indicator for or mental health for people. So we are now interested more in going visiting natural sites and going bird watching. So we have a bigger presence in natural habitat. We have more people that are traveling to different territories and ecosystems. So this, of course, puts more pressure on birds and on the environment in general. But if we ask ourselves, or if we talk about the concept of ethics, there in Peru, at least, there is not an element that connects it directly to nature, but it is about morals. So it values what is right and what is wrong. So it leans more to good practices, considering ethics as a value that each of us have. I am from Peru, and the exact number of species of birds is very high. We have 1,896 species. The only country that has more species is Colombia. And well, respect is always about bird first. The bird always comes first, and some of the advice is not stressing the bird, not chasing the bird to get a shot, for example. We want to be quiet we want to avoid any type of noise because sometimes even the clothes that we are wearing makes noise, so we need to consider even that. We don't want to inflate data in eBird, for example, Also, the colors on your clothes have to be neutral, either dark or beige, because we want to blend into the environment. We want to avoid getting too close. Now we have enough equipment. We have binoculars, we have long lenses, telescopes. That means that we don't need to invade their space anymore. Also, don't not feeding the birds because, well, obviously this is going to have an impact in their behavior and especially their diet. Also, not moving the nests around and not switching them between places. There is something that is very important as well. Do not intervene. If we find a chick, then call the natural authorities or call someone relevant, then they can let you know what to do. The photo from the slide was taken with a long lens, and if I didn't have the lens at the time, I wouldn't have been able to take this photo. And it is also important to take care of the habitat. This is in Cusco, in the jungle in Cusco, and it is very important to not leave the trail. We don't want to leave any trash behind. We want to leave no trace that we were there. So if you open a door, you close it when you go to someone's house or to someone's property, and it is exactly the same in nature. Also, it is very important to not damage any type of plants or any species in the jungle. For example, if you go to the Amazon, if you see flowers or you see potatoes or if you see plantations of corns, then it's very important that you don't damage any of it. And also avoid collecting any feathers or any eggs or any other type of biological matter unless it's justified for science, then don't do it. The ethical use of some tools or techniques that ornithologists and bird watchers do. For example, playback basically is making a sound imitating a bird, so we can call it. I don't know if you can play the audio for this.
No sé dónde está el audio.
I don't know where the audio is. Well, that's okay, no worries. Well, I wanted to show you a bird song or bird call, but it's okay. However, it is very important that we do it in a responsible way. All of these techniques that we use do have an impact if we abuse them. Playback has to be used with a specific objective. Pitching is not very common. It's like trying to call the bird. It usually works with passerine birds, but this also has a negative consequence to it because I was reading that when you make this sound, sometimes the birds can get confused and they can think that there is another bird looking for food nearby, so this can confuse the bird. So if it is not justified, then try to avoid it as much as possible. Also, pointer laser, never use it directly on the birds. I'm going to explain to you how it can be used in areas that are very dense, like tropical forests and the Amazon, for example. Sometimes it is impossible to look at the birds, so we use it for that, but never directly on the bird. Flashlights, don't use them, for example, on owls. Sometimes we use a very bright light and exactly like people, maybe we can affect their sight. And also audio recording. And now it's becoming very popular in Peru with different organizations. We have to be empathetic to the people recording the audio. And if we are recording, then we have to let people know that we're starting a recording that is 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds.
La técnica de reloj
And also the clock technique
era bastante conocida. Sí,
is very well known.
¿Quieres la grabación?
Do you want the recording? Because I can find it now.
sí sale. Sí, es que no, está bien. Es
I don't think I can hear it, but if we can't hear it, it's okay.
que hice.
It's a grass wren
Sí, sí, la
call
siguiente también.
that I recorded, but that's okay. We can go to the next slide.
La técnica del reloj
So the
ayuda
clock
muchísimo
technique
en campo.
is
Por
very
ejemplo, hay un
helpful on
bosque
the field.
vacacional aquí en Cusco.
For
Donde
example,
hay
there
fotógrafos
is a
y
forest
artistas
here
felices. Se usa
in
mucho en turismo.
Cusco.
No, a veces hay
You can see the bird where the happy face is. So this
por
is a
ejemplo, si
technique that
estamos
we
en un
use a
bosque
lot.
de bambú
For
en
example, if
el
we're
Parque
in
Nacional
a
del Hermano,
bamboo forest,
es
like in the
a
National
veces
Park El
imposible
Hermano,
la
sometimes it's
visibilidad en
impossible
altura
to
para estos
see the
hormigueros.
species.
Siguiente. La
Next one.
siguiente también. Ubicamos nuestro objetivo, por
So
ejemplo,
how
en
we
el bosque
locate
de
our
amarillo,
subject in this tree, we just
esa es la
mark
técnica
12,
muy
6,
conocida
3,
aquí
and 9, and it's a
en
clock
Cusco.
technique. It is
Y
very
nos
well
ubicamos
known
en la Cotinga,
by
a
many
la
people,
altura de
and
las
here
3
we
p.m.
are
Es un
locating
nacimiento de Crayola y de
the
Campo
Cotinga, the
Florida,
bird,
¿no?
near to 3
Entonces les
p.m.
recomiendo que puedan practicar
So
eso.
I recommend that you practice it if you're not familiar with it.
Y bueno, hay algo importante en los
And
códigos de
something
ética
very
también es la
important in
relación
the
con
code
las
of
comunidades
ethics is the
anfitrionas,
relationship
respetar
with
la
the
propiedad
host
privada
communities. We
y
need
los
to
rituales
always respect
locales.
private property
El permiso
and the
antes de
local
ingresar
arrangements.
a
We
estos lugares,
always need
sobre todo
permission
cuando
before
hacemos
entering those
fotografías
places,
culturales.
especially when we are doing cultural photography.
Fotografía,
A lot of subjects don't like
respetar
to
el
be
rol de los
photographed.
guías.
And let's also respect the guides. Of course, this is going to depend on the jurisdiction of each country or of each community, but we always want to be respectful. Here in the photograph, we have the first meeting with involvement of with the Andean community in Peru, and this was thanks to a project that we had with Cornell Lab. It was about environmental education with kids. We taught them about the projects from A to Z, and that way they were informed about what we were going to do in the community, and this started about a year ago, so we've continued to visit since then. And another thing is the code of ethics for photographers. Never use flash, keep your distance, do not manipulate the surroundings so the birds or so the photos look better. Don't manipulate anything. Do not publish the exact location of endangered species. For example, the blue-throated macaw in Bolivia and the orange-breasted falcon for Peru. This is very important to remember, and always educate yourselves and talk to other bird watchers. And whenever we visit somewhere new, it is very important that we inform ourselves about the place that where we are visiting. In eBird, you can find pictures, audios, recordings, and now you can also find pictures of the habitat itself. It is always important to get to know the local regulations of the place that we are going to visit. For example, a lens of 400 millimeters upwards is going to be considered professional photography. That is one of the local guidelines here. And always participate in conservation activities that promote good practices. And well, field guides and books are never going to go out of fashion. Actually, it is recommendable that we use local guides, regional guides of each country. For example, the one that I'm holding is the one that we have. And a lot of bird watchers love to compare guides so we can continue learning and studying. And along the way, you specialize more and more in using what you prefer. On the left, we have a basic kit for bird watching, and then on the right we can see recording equipment, telescope, digiscoping equipment. So the more you learn, then of course, the more professional you want to be. Next, please.
Siguiente. Bueno, ahora en Perú hay muchas
And well, in
opciones,
Peru,
Sudamérica hay muchas
there and in
opciones,
South
¿no?
America, there are many,
Acá
many
no había
options. I think that we didn't have as many options before. There are many brands, many models that can be accessible, and companies tend to collaborate in that sense with bird watchers and especially promoting environmental education. And I just wanted to recommend these great guides, code of ethics that helped me with the guidelines, Conavio, Ava Association, and SEO BirdLife. You can download them for free. And I just want to leave you with some quotes. You don't have to be the best to start, but you need to start to become the best. Bird watchers are honorable to their data, and we can reflect that on our eBird profile. We need to be disciplined with our data, and we need to be the multiplying effect for good actions, and bird watching is for everyone in the world. And that is my favorite. And here are some photos of environmental education with my group of bird watchers. And that's all on my behalf. Thank you so much. This is my contact information.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk, and hope we all get to visit you someday. I'd like to bring up all of our speakers right now so that we can, I know that we're at the end of our hour, but we'll take a few moments to take some questions. So if you haven't put a question in the chat and you do have a question, please put it in there now. I haven't had a chance to look back. I know that someone asked Melissa if her guide to ethical photography is in Spanish, and please look in the chat where she's put a link to the Spanish version of that. So thanks very much for making that available in Spanish, Melissa. That's excellent.
Sure, and I should have thought that that might be necessary. I knew this was an international organization, but I'm really blown away by having such a wonderfully international group attend.
No, it's wonderful to have people from around the world join us in these webinars. I think from our point of view, this year, as I mentioned at the start, we're focusing on community science and getting people engaged and learning how they can participate in projects that help to conserve birds. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people remember that when they're out there, they need to be careful about disturbing the birds. So you all have provided some really good examples of how we can do that. I've put our contact information here if you have any questions. And I'll just ask our speakers a question in case anybody else has one again. Please put it in the chat. Well, we do have one. Do agencies in the USA research an area before beach dredging? That's a good question. So typically in the United States, whenever anything happens that disturbs habitat, it has to undergo an environmental assessment or review before that can take place. So whether or not it is permitted is a different story. So it depends on a lot of factors in terms of the review process. And so sometimes it seems like it's really strict and sometimes it doesn't. So yes, there typically is review before there's habitat changes in the United States. Any other questions in here? I live at the beach and I see people feeding chips and torn bread to the birds. In discussions, I say that their digestive system isn't made for French fries, chips, and bread. Others say it is okay. What is your opinion? Let me pass that. I'll pass that first to Ana. And Ana, ¿tienes la traducción para la pregunta? I don't know if Ana has para la pregunta sobre en la playa. Y Claudia, if you
I don't know
can
if you heard
translate, I live
the
at the
question
beach and see
about
people
the
feeding
bird.
chips and torn bread to the birds. Is this okay? Miguel, could you translate that, please?
Sí, Ana, ¿puedes escuchar o quizás
Yes,
necesitas?
Anna. Did you hear the question?
La pregunta es Respecto a las
Okay,
personas
so I'm going to tell you the question. So it's about people feeding bread or chips or processed foods to birds. What recommendations have you implemented about that
Bueno,
topic?
desde mi organización hacemos
Well, in my
talleres de no
organization,
intervenir
we
cuando nos
have
encontramos
workshops
alimentos
and
con cualquier
lectures
animalito
on
pasando
not intervening. Even if we find
darle
a chick,
alimento a un animal.
we don't want to pick it up,
Pero porque
and
no
we,
es
of
su
course, talk about
uso
never
principal.
feeding the birds. That
También
is not part of their
recomendamos que
diet. We
totalmente
know that we
separado de que no se
not
alimente a las
don't
aves
feed them
de ninguna
bread
manera.
or chips or in any way, just don't
Sí,
feed
muchas
the
gracias.
birds.
Las aves encuentran su manera de alimentarse.
Yes, exactly. Birds can find their own way of finding
And
food.
hopefully everybody is in the um, translation to hear that in English, but she's not in support of feeding birds. That is a popular activity in the United States. It's one of the few times when we are permitted to feed animals and wildlife, which is bird feeding. So that is another long discussion. Jasmine Eleno, you have a question and your hand up. So we want to make sure that if you just want a short question.
Muchas Preguntarte cómo ha sido tu experiencia a otros en los ejercicios de ciencia
How
colaborativa.
has your experience with collaborative science been
Miguel, can you
with
translate that,
others?
or did you understand that?
Hola, Jasmine. La pregunta es para quién, disculpa.
Jasmine, sorry, for what was the question for? Who do you want to answer the question?
Jasmine,
Jasmine,
¿puedes abrir tu micrófono y preguntar nuevamente?
can you open your microphone and ask the question again?
Gracias. Preguntarte cómo ha sido tu experiencia.
Yes, I want to know how your experience has been
Experiencias tomando
She,
a
she,
otros a ejercicios de ciencia.
she asking about
how is your experience asking others?
some can tell about experience on recommendation, how to involve people in citizen science.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So we have prepared a list of ways that you can engage your communities or your visitors or wherever you live and work in community science. And maybe Alex, you could put a link to the Trello and some of that information. What we appreciate you're doing is finding a project that is relevant to where you live. So, for example, if you live by a beach, perhaps you want to study plastic pollution and look at how plastics, if plastics are present, and if you can remove them and encourage people to reduce their plastic use. There are a number of plastic pollution projects already developed that you can get your participants involved with so that they can learn about how to collect information or data and then how to submit it to a project to get more information. And those projects are really valuable. They really show what's going on in a community. Other projects that are good to use are, for example, if you are from Mexico or Central America, hummingbirds are beginning to migrate right now, and there are a couple of programs. JourneyNorth.org is one of them. And with JourneyNorth.org, you can help us track hummingbirds. It is really difficult to study hummingbirds because they are so small and we don't see them. In the eastern United States, we have a lot of information about the ruby-throated hummingbirds movements. In the western United States and Mexico, we have very little information, and their map will let you participate in studying hummingbirds and getting that information to us so that we can use it to understand where they're going. In terms of the community science aspect of this year's program, we hope that you'll teach people about what is the value of participating in a community science project, not just recording that you saw a bird, but what is the importance of collectively gathering information about birds. And it can be one species or it can be more species. Maybe you don't even know what birds are in your community and you just want to learn that. So that's important also. those are just a few ideas, and we've shared some in the chat right now. And you can also go to our website and to our resources on what we call our Trello board and find some more existing community science projects. Good question. Thank you so much. I'll take one more question before we need to probably let our speakers go. Any other questions? Oh, many people are using feeders for hummingbirds, and Maria says she's never been in agreement with this. What do we think about hummingbird feeders? Maybe I'll pass this to one of our speakers from the United States. Laura or Melissa, do you want to take on that question?
Sure. I think hummingbird feeders are okay as long as as long as you kind of follow the right formula and keep the feeders clean and don't use red dye. I don't necessarily think there's any possible issues with it, but you want to use the proper formulation of the sugar versus water and the quality of the sugar. Like I always, and maybe I'm too extreme, but I always get organic sugar, and 1 part sugar, 4 parts water. And but yeah, I don't see a problem. I did write an article for Audubon a few years ago called "When is it okay to feed birds or not?" Because I think there's so many different scenarios and we can't paint everything with a broad brush. And so I actually kind of came up with some basic questions to apply to any situation. You can find that on the Audubon website. It's called "When is it okay or not to feed birds" by Melissa Groo. And with the gulls, for instance, because it changes their behavior. I mean, certainly it's bad for their health, but it changes their behavior in such ways that they become problem animals and become very aggressive to people. And I think people can hurt them very readily at the beach by just being annoyed by them and, really giving them bad food or throwing rocks at them. And so what we have to think about is how are we changing the behavior of the birds that we're feeding? And if it's something that's changing them in unhealthy ways, that's a good sign we shouldn't be doing it. Sorry, that's long-winded, but
No, that was great, Melissa.
the way
Thank
I
you
am.
so much. Yeah. Feeding birds is such, I would say, United States pastime.
Yeah, it
So
is.
ingrained in our activities in the United States that I think we're on the approach of encouraging people to do it properly, like you said, Melissa, keeping their feeders clean.
Keeping cats inside, keeping your feeders clean, using appropriate fresh food, and placing feeders at a particular distance from the window so that you're not increasing the chance of window collisions.
Maybe you could put that article in the chat, Melissa.
Yes, I will
Fine.
do that. I don't know if it's available in Spanish, but I will put the English version in.
Yeah. And we actually have a grant at Environment for the Americas to do a study on hummingbird feeders. It is critical to keep those feeders clean, and they have been known to cause range expansion in at least one species of hummingbird. So we do know that it affects the birds in different ways, including beak changes. So we'll be sharing more information about that study as we get it launched. It's 15 minutes after the hour, and I appreciate all of you who have stayed on for this important discussion. It sounds like maybe we need to have another webinar at some point on bird feeding. And I hope you'll join us again in April for our discussion on bird surveys and how communities can get involved in those and how they benefit birds, not just shorebirds, but other birds as well. So thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to our translator. We appreciate you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, gracias.
Thank you so much, everyone.